Watching 2 episodes of Platinum End is always a treat for someone like myself because watching week by week, it's thought-provoking, it gets my mind racing with theories. But given what episode 19 and 20 just delivered with this professor and the idea of what God actually is and the theories and ideas he brought up, which honestly I feel are kind of like the credits there, you should probably believe a lot of what he's saying given his own angel and the information that seemingly is dropped. It's an interesting concept about like kind of bringing up the idea that God doesn't exist and what is there is basically a creature that feeds off human emotions and the desire to have something that you can pray to and hope that things will get better so you don't have to take blame for your own shortcomings or shit that's happened in your life. And the idea of having an angel literally wanting to destroy the heavens, because if this system is destroyed, what happens to these so-called angels? Well, they're going to fall as well. So you understand why most would push back against it. But then you have the angel of destruction basically it reminds me of that meme of the girl just looking at the fire and just, smiling at it. It's just like some people want to watch the world burn, and I mean, this angel seemingly is one of them. What I love about the 2 episodes, especially with the dramatic cliffhanger, I mean, the idea of having these people floating around considering themselves God candidates, I mean, most people would assume you can't touch them. So to see that if you get them in their blind spot, as we see with this kid who was like pointing out the snipers and then in return got killed, I mean, it definitely shakes the world because now there's going to be people who realize, I was going along with this because they're God candidates. They can fly and they can seemingly control. Like, I don't want to get on their bad side. But a bullet seemingly just took one out, so maybe I don't have to go along with it, and then other people are going to get more riled up because of it. It's a very fascinating concept, and I think Mirai, of all the characters revealing his motivations should he become God, probably had the best reason. I'd do nothing if I was God. And that was the only thing that actually made the professor intrigued out of all of them, because most of their reasons are pretty shallow. And the ones that aren't necessarily shadowed, like the idea of like, I'd make the world so people could die and have a painless death and it wouldn't be frowned upon. There's people who clearly aren't that popular in the crowd saying, yeah, I would absolutely die if I knew it'd be painless right here and now. There's sickly, elderly people being like, that kid has an open mind. And then other people think he's batshit crazy. One of the things I really liked in episode 19 is the idea of like removing smartphones and the internet basically, where like people are like, yeah, we're right, you can't say anything without being crucified online these days. And I'm like, honestly, I think social media in general, the more we look at it, despite having all that information at our fingertips, there's so much disinformation, it probably would be better if you could become God. Just eliminate social media in general. We were so much better without it, let's be completely honest. But it was interesting seeing all the reactions, as also you kind of have this idea, because when he's talking about like, he's trying to downplay everything, right? The professor is saying like the idea of the souls, it's not actually souls, it's just a visual representation. I thought that was so interesting because for this kid who wants to die so bad, he saw someone basically have their soul dragged away in what would appear to be the afterlife, and the idea of thinking about there being nothing, then ending your suffering in the mortal world isn't going to make it any better. In fact, you're going to suffer more when you're dead because nothing's there. And the idea that the professor combats it as like the angels are just bringing up something for show. They're not actually the souls. This is all for this creature. He's not even calling it God. It's a creature born out of the desires, and the fact that he wants to destroy that thing. I thought, God damn, that is so fascinating. And the fact that he's so interested in Mirai above all else. We're going to have a very interesting battle of wits because you have someone who is arguably the most intelligent person in their world, based on dialogue that was especially in episode 20, seemingly no one can compare to his intellect. And then you have Mirai, the average Joe, doesn't want power, but just wants people to be happy. And I think that would be a very interesting contrast because we had that kind of similar with Metropoliman in him. But Metropolitan just kind of was an insane bastard who wanted power for himself, where the professor is an intellectual who I think could provide for a pretty interesting conversation that could last a couple of episodes with no one but them talking about their ideas and what it means. He's super calculated, he's super cautious, which is why even the most devoted follower got shot with a red arrow. And the idea that we kind of casually drop information that's been there hidden in plain sight, but I never really clued into it myself, the idea of Nasi's secret power. Because as we know, angels can't touch things, right? The same way that God candidates can't touch like these other things. And the fact that Nase actually started this show out by catching a human, it's something that on paper doesn't seem like that crazy of a power, but as the professor says, the angel can essentially change the fate of her human. It's not sitting back and watching, because as we see when the professor is pointing a white arrow at this kid here, he's saying, I can kill him now or later, tell me what I want to know and he can die later. She can't do anything to pull him away, she just has to sit back and watch, where Nase can literally intervene, and that's quite an interesting turn of events, and how I wasn't even thinking about that for so long, despite it being something that's clearly so different than everyone else. Like, we've always known Nase cares about Mirai more than the other angels. There's been plenty of angels that just kind of go with the flow. Other angels want their candidate to become God, but they're not, like, doing the same type of, like, motherly, sisterly instincts that Nase is. And it's going to be interesting to see the reasons behind that before the show does wrap up. But I have to say, and just commend this show for being this thought-provoking, because I've had so many people over the last couple of weeks in the videos saying, like, if you're loving this stuff, you're going to love the end game even more, because that's what this is. It's just thought-provoking, it makes your brain stretch, and you're probably going to get a bit of a migraine as well thinking about what it all means. And it's going to be fascinating because now that everything is out in the open, we no longer can go where we have gone before, right? We can't, float in the sky, make our demands. Everyone knows what each candidate represents, what they want to do. And the biggest thing is now they're vulnerable because weapons do work. That's probably one of the biggest things why military didn't act as strongly as they did. Because if this person can shoot something and either control us or blow us apart with an arrow that we can't see coming, then we don't want to take a risk and have them destroy our country. Weapons work against them. That has now been confirmed. It's been filmed. There's a lot of shit that can go wrong, but also can go very right, and it'll be interesting to see what's going to go down now that everything's kind of out in the open. I think, honestly, out of every character I've met in this show, the Professor's probably my favorite. Not because, like, on a personal level I relate to him or anything, but more so the things he says and the way he portrays what we're seeing. Like, most people at this point, we see angels, we know God's up there. God is what we think God is, right? A powerful being just going to pass his power. But no, it seems like God honestly is more of a creature born out of these desires, and what happens when there's only one left? Like, is the whole selection process just simply there to make sure that people believe in God, and then once that energy's back up there, does he get rid of the last candidate? There's so many uncertainties, right? But I think, honestly, what the Professor's saying, I'm willing to believe him a bit more than anything else I've heard so far, especially because the angels themselves can't really push back against what he's saying all too hard. Though the backstory of him was actually kind of interesting. I like the idea of someone being that smart, and how, for him, wanting to be alone and doing his research is the thing he wants to do the most, but because he's smarter than everyone else, he ultimately got so popular that he has to go to award shows, all these things that are just ruining his life. Because I was wondering, why would someone that smart want to kill himself? And the idea that he just came down to, like, wanting to see what would happen on the other side, because there's no proof until you die. Either you die and your mind shut off, or you die and there's some form of afterlife. But seeing how miserable he was because he couldn't be alone anymore, just everything about it was just a nice bow to tie it all together. I'm loving Platinum End, I really, really am. It's getting better with time, like a nice wine aging, and no one can tell me otherwise. Thoughts and feelings either on last week's episode or this week's episode? Leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe if you're new around here. Till next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.